Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, your host, War Rabbit, and today we are doing a review of Metaphor ReFantazio. As always, I would appreciate it if you liked the video, and if you want to see more of my content, hit the subscribe button. It would also help me a lot if you left me a comment in the video with any critiques or how to improve my content. Anyways, enough begging, let's get into it. So, Metaphor ReFantazio is a very special game. It was made by the same devs that made the Persona series, so it has a certain flair that is a little lacking in more modern games or non-Persona series games. They're a little, kind of almost like a fever dream at time with some of the enemy types, but they're pretty cool. Unlike other JRPGs that have come out in recent years though, like Final Fantasy 15, Metaphor ReFantazio chose to remain true to the standard JRPG origins by staying as a turn-based RPG over a more action-oriented gameplay system like Final Fantasy 16, where they went away from the turn-based combat and they kept more of like a, I guess you could call it like almost a Devil May Cry action hack and slash type of deal, but it's not really close to that, but it's more closer to it than a turn-based RPG. The devs at Altus managed to create a simple but enjoyable turn-based combat system with a mild twist of overworld real-time combat, a la a super simple version of like DM's of Devil May Cry or something like that, but it's just like a couple random hits and stuff like that. But yeah, anyways, Metaphor ReFantazio's success is a testament that turn-based combat is not really a dying medium, and the reason why the games are struggling to perform well is because that all the games prior that don't do well for turn-based combat are rather just lackluster attempts, and that's the real issue. And even then, some of the lackluster attempts still do really well. Additionally, the game lacks any of the modern gameplay features more common in the Western side of game development. Being freed from these shackles seemed to allow the devs the freedom needed to make the game grittier and darker. It has a bright and playful art style that's juxtaposed by the brutalities of medieval life and the inherent evils of institutionalized racism. No one is evil in the game because they are prejudiced against everyone that isn't part of their specific race, and mixed race individuals ridiculed against. If a Western dev made a game like this, it would incorporate the standoff motifs of rampant narcissism and patronization that the individuals of the setting are backwards for their beliefs and should be treating as being incapable of doing better. Altus, in contrast, allowed this level of hatred to play out between multiple groups to highlight the destitution of the system, and allows the player to make up their own minds rather than realistically beating them over the head with the direct "this is bad" moments. They're not very. It's not like they think the system is bad and you can tell it's bad, but they're not telling you specifically this is bad, like in a Western game. Or they're not just slamming it over here. It's like, okay, you just see this character being a racist bigot, and man, that guy's a piece of shit. The main character, though, is part of the most discriminated group, and that adds to the challenge the main character goes through and how he overcomes them. Each story arc is enjoyable as a standalone story that combines with the overall plot, making them incredibly easy to digest while adding to the setting of the world the devs created. There are some tendrils of the modern game development woes in the game. Some of the translations are a little off, and knowing some Japanese shows that the taint of localizers unfortunately infected the title. Realistically, the mistranslations in the English subs are not important, but it is sad that the original intention of the devs was altered by some snobby localizers, no matter how minor. Like, it's just a few things, like that's not the right word and stuff like that. Maybe it's just not even a localization issue. Maybe it's just the translators were trying to pick a different meaning when it kind of seems something else, but it's close enough, but at times it's a little jarring. Overall, the story is pretty straightforward, some easy to follow twists that keep you entertained to continue the game. It is an impressive feat to combine the sacrifice of an entire city to satiate a monster to the world, and it goes to the world as effectively dead, and the previous civilization devolved from a modern hyper-advanced civilization to medieval serfdom. Juggling the story arcs with the individual character arcs show a mastery of the story medium. Each character, including the player character, has a well-written backstory and character arcs that play out by spending time with them in the game. Unfortunately, those backstories and arcs are locked behind a time system that is quite unfun and it's a little backwater at times. Like, it's just backwards. And I don't really like it as much, but I'll get into it later. My biggest complaint about the story of this game is how worky most of the game is. There's just so much dialogue that it quite literally put me to sleep at times while playing. There are multiple times the dialogue is just words for the sake of words and nothing of import is said. There are multiple hour-long sections of characters talking about the same thing over and over and over again, and nothing is really progressed story-wise, as the player already knows what's going on and there's just no new information being put out. As much as I like the character stories, they occasionally overstayed their welcome, and I just wanted to skip them at the end of the day. It's like, yeah, it's like most of it's interesting, but like 90% of it's just you're just sitting there talking to them, and then they're like, oh my god, this happened to me, and it's like, I just don't care, just let me play the game. And the sad part is, although the side character stories are interesting, after the fourth time of them just effectively saying the same dialogue being said in a different 10-minute word cutscenes, I just got annoyed and bored. There's some important revelations in the dialogue. It's just that there's literal hours of filler between actual interesting topics or conversation lines. But even at the end of the day, with all of my whinging and all my whining about how boring it is, it still beats AC Shadows or Dragon Age the Veilguard writing any day of the week. I'd much rather sit through these hour-long dialogue cutscenes than just play a minute, like just play the Tosh cutscene from Dragon Age Veilguard. That's just bad. But yeah. Metaphor ReFantazio, managing to rehash a simple cliche story of the rightful king returns and become the king was not something I was expecting to come out, even if I played it a year late. That type of cliche is really played on, and a lot of titles have already done it really well, so it's hard to come in with a new version of the story. But it worked out pretty well. It wasn't. It was kind of cookie cutter you went through, and there was the standard JRPG insanity. And it wasn't off-putting as some other titles I've played. And as much as I like the JRPG tropes of starting out in a secluded village to ultimately killing God in like a 20-hour time period, it does get a little tiresome after the billionth time. However, every time I say that, I always fall back to playing this proverbial junk food that is the standard JRPG game of just like, oh yeah, you're just a kid fishing at the river. Go kill God. And it's like, okay, I'll do it. Just show me how I'm going to do it. But yeah, it sounds fun. The core gameplay loop of the game is quite enjoyable, with some minor hiccups that get dealt with as you progress. You can either ambush the enemy in the overworld by attacking them, which is the objective best way to fight, or just jump straight into the battle. The third option is you get jumped by the enemy in the overworld, which adds an avenue for the enemies to fight back against the player's shenanigans. And although the overworld combat was a nice variety of the core combat loop, it had a major failing when on higher difficulties. The enemy being able to attack first with initiative was normally just a team wipe or an instant flee from battle, which really was just wasted my time rather than adding another level to combat. However, once inside the actual battle, the player has a very simple turn-based combat system that has some strategy involved later in the game. Most fights end pretty much instantly, but the ones that don't take dozens of turns on the harder difficulties, making them challenging and enjoyable. The bosses are unique, but like all other RPGs and turn-based RPGs, they get reused later in the game with a recolor and a stat boost. It's an industry standard, but it feels bad to fight the same-ish enemies in the late game, especially when their mechanics are just copy-paste of the previous fights with a little more health and damage. You know, it's just same problem with Elden Ring, where like I think it was only like 9 bosses in the entire game were truly unique. The others were just enemies with bigger health bars or just reused assets, and it's just kind of lazy, but you know, it is what it is. You just have to get over it, I guess. The only truly unique bosses were the dragon enemies, and they were kind of copy and paste anyways, but they were different fights with like slightly different looks, so it's not terrible. And they were less a turn-based fight and more a puzzle that had to be solved, which added to the enjoyment factor of the combat system, because I really had to rack my brain to build the perfect team to beat them, while previous bosses don't require much planning, and I just kind of brute forced my way through. Like those fights involved, like it's nice when in a turn-based game I have to like sit down and kind of parse through the items I have and put the best armor or best weapons on to be able and have the skills in the right setting to be able to go through and do them. It's kind of like doing a Pokemon Nuzlocke type of deal, so it's just that kind of fun for me, but I know some people might not like it that much. And then the next part of the gameplay loop outside the actual combat is itemation and build crafting. For the most part, each character is locked in their own archetype due to how each character gains attribute levels. The only exception is the main protagonist, which allows some build variety until the late game when you unlock the Prince archetype. The Prince archetype's just the best archetype class in the game, no contest, and it's available just before the start of the final act. The class had an easy spammable super move alongside a massive one-shot attack that I didn't manage to unlock due to in-game time constraints, which sucked. I saw a clip of it, it's pretty cool. And it's just like, oh, yeah, just time to do like the maximum amount of damage you could possibly do in one swing. And additionally to the Prince archetype, leveling each character tended to resolve around their final classes, which required you to put more resources into certain archetypes to be able to unlock their final forms. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to unlock all the royal archetypes by the end because I mismanaged the time system and it just screwed me over. It was a real letdown to see how to unlock the royal archetypes for each character. I only realized that I was leveling them wrong and wasted quite a bit of resources that I had to grind later in the game for. So it's just like, oh yeah, I want this character to have this thing so I can have this level utility, but like if I knew that you had to just grind indefinitely, only do one archetype, only do one type of deal, I would have done that over what I did. And kind of sucks because like when you're doing like a blind playthrough and you don't know how everything works out, it just feels bad. But luckily you have enough time to grind all the resources you possibly need before the final boss. But if you fail to unlock the time requirements, you could just not unlock everything and you'd miss out on one, you miss out on an achievement, and two, you miss out on the super final boss kill move. And it's just is what it is. Now let's get into my most detested part of the game. The time cycle system is an almost common system in RPG games used to prevent the player from spending too much time grinding, while also keeping the player on their toes with a sense of urgency as the time ticker ticks down. And Metaphor ReFantazio managed to hit both of my stated reasons for a time cycle, but it was implemented in the most aggravating way. Time progresses whenever you travel between locations, and doing an action that levels your royal virtue or like even cooking is like ridiculous. And it's dumb. It's just dumb. It seems like a simple system, but it's connected to so many important parts of the game that it becomes a chore to work around, and ultimately it's an annoyance later in the game. Like, as I was doing a blind playthrough of the game, I just didn't know there were time requirements to certain key leveling parts of the game. The final archetypes you can unlock requires the player to max out the relationship level of the side characters while completing all their story, which requires you to spend time sitting there and leveling your royal virtues, which is just a time-based system that exists to force the player away from actual level grinding and the main story to level arbitrary attributes. So first you have to level the royal virtues, which causes the time cycle to progress. Then you have to talk to the side characters, which causes the time cycle to progress. It just doesn't sound too difficult until you realize it takes multiple days, which are composed of 2 time cycles to level 1 level of royal virtues. And even then it wouldn't be so bad if going to a dungeon didn't eat through a whole day's time cycle rotation. Add to the fact that leveling is arbitrarily locked to how much mana the player has, which effectively forces you to return from a dungeon because you can't use skills or spell once you run out. So that's how they designed it, to make it so that you couldn't just farm in a dungeon. And then even then there's also an XP reduction, so farming areas that you're already beaten or like you can comfortably beat is just makes it even more time consuming or just outright ineffective because the enemies are barely giving you XP. So it's trying to force you to go forward, but it's kind of like, oh, like if you don't want me to grind, then don't have an RPG game where you need to grind a little bit towards certain sections of the game. However, the devs also added other systems to waste time, in which I fell for, and it's mainly just a skill diff complaint, but it is annoying if you're not prepared beforehand. You know, like there's like ways to level your attribute points, like strength and stuff like that, and if you do that for the main character, you literally there's just no noticeable damage increase. Like it says, oh, I spent like 10 time cycles, basically like half a day worth of leveling in like in a bathtub, and you think, oh, you get majors. Like, no, that gave me like 20 extra points in strength and my damage increased by like 1. So it's like those attribute points didn't matter at all, and it's just okay, you know. And then my biggest issue with the system is that key abilities are locked behind the relationship system, which I didn't know how to rush for until it was already way too late to address properly. Like, a lot of the issues I had in the early game could have just been dealt with if I knew beforehand that an ability counters that issue completely, instead of just giving the protagonist the minute damage buff just by chilling in a hot tub. You know, at the end of the day, though, the time system isn't so bad that I hate it. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth in hindsight, because like major parts of the game are locked behind it, and you can kind of just like, if you somewhat ignore it, or like if you don't level the relationship levels in each individual character, you can't unlock the final skill. Well, that's enough whining. Let's get into the performance of the game. For the most part, my average PC ran surprisingly well. I don't remember if I crashed once, but there were some frame drops here and there. It wasn't too big. Like, there's some bugs, but I did play it out a year after release, so it's most likely most of the issues were ironed out alongside any other performance issues. It seems Meta for ReFantazio is the same level of quality of performance as Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which is surprising because you can run Clair Obscur on a potato. You know, I ran that thing on a 1060, not even a TH, normal 1060 on lowest graphic settings, and I was getting like a solid 60 frames. So this game is pretty well optimized, at least at the current timing. It does, like, the performance does fly in contrast to some of the other titles that released this year. Like, I'm struggling with Wu Chang Fallen Feathers and like Doom the Dark Ages. Like, even on like the medium settings, or like even some high settings, like where the recommended amount says no, you should be able to play at this setting at 60 frames. With this 40 series graphics card, which I have now, it still struggles quite a bit. I don't think I could play Metaphor on the highest setting without having like major like performance issues, even on a 40 series, but like on like high and stuff, it worked pretty well. Now it's time for probably the weirdest part of the game, and that's the music and character designs. They're fun, flamboyant, and at times just really wacky and weird. And the music goes from like calm orchestral music that rises here and there with vibrant vocals to insanely funny chanting of the combat music. Like, it's just, you boot up the game and you just hear a guy chanting, and it's like Sutra, and I didn't know what the hell it was, and I was just vibing to it when it boots up, because it's just always funny to me, because you hear it's just a funny little thing. The character design for the main cast is quite tame, with like minor deviations to just flat out bat people. So it's like you got like the little elf people, you got bat people, you got humans with horns and so forth. It's just like, it is what it is. Enemy design is pretty tame, and it's like, it's just some of the people look like they just came out of a Dragon Quest title, and then you see like the first human type enemy, and then that gets weird real quick. The human enemy type is like a mix of body horror and fever dream, and although I've never played the Persona series, I can guess there are similar looking enemies, because this seems like a style choice rather than poor design. And after I got over the initial aversion, I can respect the craft. You know, just slamming random objects and creatures together with human body parts and making it seem like it's a living organism. You know, it's an interesting mismatch to see the human enemy types and normal enemies in the same combat, because of how out of place they are. It really adds to the alien monster aspect of the enemy type and builds in the story world. Like, there was like literally just a giant egg with like a human face on it, and you can blow it up and like a million random dudes just jump out and attack you. That's like, what's going on? It's a funny little fight. So after all this jabbering, how do I really feel about Meta for ReFantazio? Yeah, I did enjoy my playthrough of Meta for ReFantazio, and I can see why some people thought it was a Game of the Year candidate, but it had some issues that were like neither here nor there. The story was simple, but extremely effective in keeping you invested in the journey. Combat was fun and added a new lease on life to turn-based combat RPGs that have been on the way out in the modern era. Like, Altus proved once again that a game doesn't need to treat their players like they have the attention span of a goldfish, even though at times I wish they did, because the game was just painfully slow and the dialogue just ground on, and I was just not ready for it. Yeah, the game had some issues with the time system, but I do think if you came into the game with a better understanding of what needs to be done as you progress it, it'll be a lot easier to manage, even if it's annoying the first go around. I agree with most of the reviews that Meta for ReFantazio is a great game, and I really do recommend playing it if you haven't. And with that, I give Meta for ReFantazio an 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great rest of your day.